I stopped to help my widowed ex-wife with her stuck car on the shoulder of Route 12, and I swear to God I didn't know it was her until I was already out of the truck with the strap in my hand. 9 years. 9 years since Delaney Prosper stood on the other side of visitation glass and told me I never even cried. 9 years since I signed the papers from a cell in Jefferson City and had her name taken off my visitor list so she'd stop wasting her Saturdays on a man the whole town of Coldwater Bend believed was guilty. She'd buried a husband since then, a good one, a kind one, a school teacher named Ellis who deserved every year he got. And now she was standing in the cold March rain in his old wagon, with the back wheels sunk in the mud, holding a phone, with no bars, with a 5-year-old girl asleep in the booster seat behind her. She said my name like it was a question. Wade? I hooked the strap. I pulled her out. I checked her tires, told her to take it slow past the bridge, and I got back in my truck without saying one word about the 9 years, because there was nothing I was allowed to say. But she saw them. She saw the flowers sitting on my passenger seat. White ranunculus, the same ones that had appeared on our daughter's grave every March 3rd for 9 straight years. The ones she'd always thought came from a stranger. And it was March 2nd. So here's what I need you to understand before we go one step further. I stopped to help my widowed ex-wife with her stuck car, and I drove away thinking that was the end of it. But the next day, she showed up again. Not at my shop, not at my door, but standing at Wren's headstone at 20 to 8 in the morning, in the same coat she'd worn the night before, waiting for me to come over that hill with those flowers in my hand. Why does a woman who hasn't spoken to me in 9 years drive out to a grave in the freezing cold to wait for the man she thinks put himself in prison? What was in the envelope her dead husband left behind with my name written on it? And why, when she finally asks me the one question I've spent 9 years refusing to answer, is the truth the one thing that could destroy the only reason I ever went quiet in the first place? Let me take you back to the rain. It was 6:40 in the evening, and the sky over Coldwater Bend had gone the color of an old bruise. I'd closed the shop early. Kerrigan Machine and Small Engine, my name on a metal building, which still felt like a joke some days, because for 4 years, my name had been a number instead. I had the flowers on the seat because I buy them the night before. I always buy them the night before. If you wait until the morning of, something goes wrong. A truck won't start. A road floods. And then a little girl who never got to breathe one time waits on a hill by herself. And I don't allow that. Not once in 9 years. I came around the bend by the Halverson fence line, and there were hazard lights blinking in the dark, low and crooked, the way they blink when a car isn't sitting level anymore. I almost didn't stop. I want you to know that. I almost drove past, because in a town this size, stopping means somebody sees your face, and there are still people here who cross the street when they see my face. I had my foot easing off the brake when the headlights swung across the back of that wagon, and I saw the bumper. Green Volvo, rust starting under the wheel well. A faded sticker for the Coldwater Bend Science Fair, the kind a teacher gets for free. I knew the car before I knew her. I pulled in ahead of it, got out, and the rain hit me sideways, cold enough to sting. I had the strap over my shoulder and I was already crouching to find the tow point when the driver's door opened and a woman said, "Thank you so much, I've been out here 20. And she stopped, and I looked up. 9 years is a strange amount of time. It's long enough for a person's face to change, and short enough that you know it anyway. Instantly. The way you know your own hands in the dark. Her hair was shorter. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there when she was 26. She was thinner than she should have been, and she was looking at me the way you look at a photograph you thought you'd burned. Wade, I didn't answer her. I want to be honest with you about that, because this story doesn't work if I'm the good guy the whole way through. I didn't answer her, because if I'd opened my mouth right then, something was going to come out of it that I'd spent 9 years swallowing, and I could not afford that. Not there, not on the side of a road in the rain. So I said, "Put it in neutral." She stood there for a second longer. The rain was coming off the ends of her hair. Then she said, "Okay," very quietly, and got back in. Here's what I noticed while I was hooking that strap. And I noticed all of it in about 11 seconds, because that's what your eyes do when you love somebody, and you're not allowed to. Her tires were bald. Not low, bald. The kind of bald where the wear bars are showing, and the next hard rain is going to send her into a ditch worse than this one. There was a school lunchroom badge on a lanyard hanging off her mirror. Delaney Prosper, Coldwater Bend Elementary, Nutrition Services. She'd wanted to be a nurse once. She had 2 years of the program done when everything came apart. Her wedding ring wasn't on her hand. It was on a chain around her neck, tucked half under her collar. And in the back seat, in a booster, there was a little girl asleep with her cheek smashed against the strap and her mouth open, holding a plastic dinosaur by the tail. I got in my truck. I put it in low. I let the strap take up slow. You don't yank a car out of mud, you ask it. And that wagon came up out of the shoulder easy as anything and settled on the pavement. I unhooked. I coiled the strap. And then I did the thing I'd promised myself I would never do, which was let myself have 1 extra minute. I crouched by her front tire, and I ran my thumb across it. Nothing. Slick as a plate. She'd rolled the window down. "Wade, I can pay you. Let me—" "Your tires are gone," I said. "I know." "You're going to get killed on these." "I know." And there it was. That flash. That iron underneath. Delaney was never soft. People always thought she was soft because she was kind. They're on the list, okay? The list is long. I stood up. The rain was running down the back of my collar. She was looking at me, and I could feel the 9 years standing there in the road with us like a third person. And I understood that if I stayed 1 more second, she was going to ask me a question I couldn't answer. "Take it slow past the bridge," I said. "It'll be slick where the shade holds." And I walked away. Behind me, I heard her say my name 1 more time. Not a question this time, just my name, sort of broken in the middle. I didn't turn around. I got in my truck, and my hands were shaking so bad I had to hold the wheel to make them stop. And I sat there at the 4-way, with my blinker going for a long time before I could make myself drive. Here's what I didn't know. When I stood up from that tire, my truck door was open. The dome light was on. And on my passenger seat, in a paper sleeve from Marbury's Flowers over in Ridgeton, because I don't buy them in town, I've never once bought them in town, sat a bundle of white ranunculus. She saw them. She sat in that wagon in the rain, and she looked at those flowers, and she watched me drive away. And something in her chest that had been closed for 9 years cracked straight down the middle, because Delaney Prosper had been going up that hill on March 3rd every single year too. And every single year, somebody had already been there. Let me tell you about the flowers, and then I'll tell you about the morning. Our daughter's name is Wren. She was 23 weeks. She was born on the 3rd of March in a room with green walls, and she never took a breath. And by the time it happened, I had already been in Jefferson City for 4 months. They let me go to the burial. I want you to picture this, because I've never said it out loud to another living soul, and I'm only saying it now, because you need to understand what kind of man Delaney thought she was married to. They put me in a van with 2 corrections officers. They put me in leg irons and a belly chain, and they walked me up that hill at Riverview in a state-issue jumpsuit in front of 30 people from the town I grew up in. My mother was there. My brother was not. Delaney was standing at the front in a black dress, 26 years old, 4 days out of a hospital, and she looked back at me over her shoulder. The officers had told me the rules in the van. If you get emotional, if you get loud, we end it and we take you back. So I stood there. And I put my face in the exact position I'd learned to put it in inside, which is nothing, which is stone, which is a door with nobody home behind it. Because if I broke, they would drag me down that hill in chains before my daughter was in the ground. And there was no version of this life where I was going to let that happen. And I did not cry, not 1 tear, not one. I looked like a man who didn't care, and 3 weeks later, Delaney came to see me and sat down on the other side of that glass and picked up the phone, and her hands were shaking, and she said, "I have been trying for 3 weeks to figure out how to say this." And I said, "Don't." And she said, "Wade, I buried our daughter, and I looked at you, and you were standing there like it was a line at the bank." I gripped that phone so hard I heard the plastic creak. She said, "You never even cried." And I said the worst sentence of my entire life. I said, There's paperwork coming, sign it. Don't fight it. She said, "What paperwork?" I said, "Sign it." "Delaney." She started crying then. Really crying. The ugly kind. With her hand flat on the glass. She said, "I'll wait. 4 years is nothing. I'll wait. I don't care, I'll wait." And I hung up the phone. I hung up the phone and I stood up. And I put my hands behind my back. And I walked out of that room, while she was still screaming my name through the glass. And the next morning, I filled out the form to have her removed from my visitation list. Now, you want to know why? Everybody in Coldwater Bend thinks they already know. They think Wade Kerrigan got drunk, got in his truck, and killed a 24-year-old man named Tobias Renard on Route 12 on a Friday night in August, and then got a soft plea because his lawyer was slick. That's what the paper said. That's what the judge said. That's what I said. Out loud, under oath, in a courtroom with my hand up. It wasn't me driving. It was my little brother Cade, 22 years old, 1 DUI already on his record from the year before, driving my truck because his was in my shop with a bad water pump. He'd had 4 beers at a party out on Kessler Road. He came around that bend too fast, and Tobias Renard was on a motorcycle, and there was nothing anybody could do after that. Cade called me at 11:40 at night from the ditch. He wasn't calling for a lawyer. He was calling because he was 22, and he was screaming, and he didn't know what a human being does after something like that. I got there before the troopers did, and here is the math I did standing on the side of that road with the smell of gasoline and hot metal in the air, and a man dying 40 feet away. Cade had a prior. A second one, with a death, meant 12 to 15 years. My brother's wife, Marisol, was 8 months pregnant. That baby was going to grow up visiting her father through glass until she was in high school. And I had a clean record, a business, and a wife who was strong enough to survive 4 years without me. I thought I was doing the math right. I have had 9 years to think about how wrong I got it. When the troopers came, I was standing next to the driver's door with the keys in my hand, and I told them I was driving. Cade was in the grass throwing up, and they figured him for a passenger who'd seen something ugly. I passed the breathalyzer. I hadn't had a drink in 5 years, which is its own story, but there were 3 people at that party who'd say the truck was there, and speed did the rest. Vehicular manslaughter. 4 years, out in 3 years and 2 months on good time. And here's the part that locked the door behind me forever. Once I said it under oath, I couldn't unsay it. Not without a perjury charge that would have blown the plea wide open and put Cade in front of a judge anyway, 9 years late, with a lie stacked on top of it. My lawyer told me plain, you take this in, you take it all the way down. So I never told Delaney, not because I didn't trust her, because I trusted her completely, and I knew exactly what she would do with it. She would have burned the whole world down to get me out. She would have gone to the paper, the prosecutor, Marisol's front door, and she'd have been right to, and it would have destroyed 4 lives instead of 1. So I let the woman I loved believe I killed a man, and then I let her bury our daughter alone. Now let me tell you about the morning after that rain. I didn't sleep. I got up at 6, made coffee I didn't drink, and put those flowers in the truck. The rain had quit sometime in the night, and left everything gray and dripping and cold enough that the mud in the parking lot at Riverview had a skin of ice on it. I parked. I got the ranunculus off the seat, and I started up that hill the way I've started up it 9 times, with my head down, counting the fence posts, because if I look up too early, I see the little gray stone before I'm ready, and it takes my legs out from under me every time. Post 4, post 5, post 6. I looked up. There was somebody standing at Wren's grave. I stopped so fast I nearly went down on the wet grass. In 9 years, I had never once seen another living soul on that hill on the morning of March 3rd. That was the arrangement I had with God, or with luck, or with whatever it is that runs the schedule of a small-town cemetery in the off-season. She came in the afternoon. I came at first light. We had never crossed, not one time. It was Delaney, same coat as the night before, arms wrapped around herself, hair still damp at the ends. She'd been standing there long enough that her breath had stopped fogging in big clouds and settled into small ones, which is how you know somebody's been in the cold a while. She turned around, and she looked at the flowers in my hand. Neither one of us said anything for what felt like a year. A truck went by down on the road. Somewhere behind the trees a crow was going off. And then Delaney Prosper said the sentence that ended 9 years of silence. "It was you." I couldn't move. 9 years. Her voice was doing something terrible, going up and cracking and coming back down. Every single year I came up here, and somebody had already been. And I asked the groundskeeper, and he said he didn't know. And I asked the church. And one year I sat in my car in that lot for 2 hours on the 2nd of March, trying to catch whoever it was, and I left at midnight because June had an ear infection and She stopped. She pressed her hand over her mouth. "It was you," she said again. "It was you the whole time." I looked at the stone behind her. "Wren Kerrigan. It's a small one. Gray granite, rounded top. There's a bird cut into the corner of it. Badly. Because the man who cut it was doing me a favor at cost, and his hands weren't what they used to be." "Wade." She was crying now, openly, not wiping it. "Say something. Please. Say one thing." And I heard my own voice come out of my chest, flat and strange, saying the only true thing I had left. "I took my name off everything else you had," I said. I wasn't taking it off her. Her knees went. She caught herself on the top of the headstone, put her whole hand down flat on our daughter's name to keep from falling, and I crossed that grass without deciding to. And I had her by the elbow before she hit the ground. First time I'd touched her in 9 years. She grabbed my coat, both hands, fists in the canvas like she was drowning. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said into my shoulder. "Because you'd have thanked me." "So what?" I didn't want to be thanked. My voice cracked open right down the middle, and I let it. I wanted to be her dad. For 10 minutes a year. That's all I ever wanted. Delaney. 10 minutes a year where nobody was watching. She held on. The sun came up over the tree line behind the maintenance shed and lit the frost on all of it. The stones, the grass, the top of her head. And then she let go of my coat and stepped back and wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and I watched her put herself back together the way she always could, in about 4 seconds flat, and I knew before she opened her mouth that something else was coming. "Wade," she said, "I need to ask you about something, and I need you not to walk away from me again. Okay? When Ellis died, I couldn't go through his desk. It took me 14 months. I finally started last week." She was watching my face like she was checking a gauge. "There's a drawer of letters he wrote for June, one for every birthday until she's 18. He wrote them in the hospital the week they thought it was migraines." I nodded. My chest hurt. "And underneath them," she said, "there's a sealed envelope. Something cold started at the base of my spine. It's got a name on it," Delaney said. "It's not mine. It's not June's." She reached into her coat pocket. "It's yours." She held it out. A plain white envelope, gone soft at the corners from riding around in her coat, and on the front of it, in blue ballpoint, in the careful print of a man who spent his whole life writing on chalkboards for children. "Wade Kerrigan." "I didn't take it. Delaney, take it." "I don't know what that is." "Neither do I." Her chin was shaking. "I didn't open it. 14 months I couldn't touch his desk, and then I find an envelope with my ex-husband's name on it, in my dead husband's handwriting, and I didn't open it. Wade, and you have no idea what that cost me." The wind came across that hill and moved the paper in her hand. I took it. It weighed nothing. 2 pages, maybe 3. I turned it over, and the flap was sealed the old way, licked and pressed, and there was a small dent in the corner, where a thumb had held it, while the glue dried. "Not here," I said. "Why not here?" "Because if it says what I think it might say, I'm not going to be standing up when I finish it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "My car's at the bottom of the hill." We sat in that green wagon with the heater going and the windows fogging up. A divorced man and a widow and a bundle of white ranunculus on the dash, and I opened Ellis Ashbury's letter with my thumb. I'd only met him twice. Once at the hardware store, where he nodded at me, and I nodded back. Once at the gas pumps, where he said, "Morning," and I said, "Morning," and I sat in my truck afterward for 10 minutes, because I just watched a man I had no right to hate put gas in a car with a car seat in the back. His handwriting was small and even. "Wade," If you're reading this, I'm dead, and I'm sorry about that. Mostly for June's sake and Delaney's. I've written this letter 4 times in the last 11 days. This is the version I'm going to seal. You don't know me. I know you. Not the way the town knows you. The other way. I looked up. Delaney was watching my hands, not my face. In the spring of my 2nd year at the elementary, I had a boy in my class named Owen Renard. Good kid. Quiet. His mother married Tobias Renard's brother 2 years after the accident, and Owen came to me one afternoon during silent reading and asked me if a person could be guilty of something they didn't do. My hands went cold. I asked him what he meant. He told me his uncle Cade, his stepfather's neighbor's boy, is how he said it. Kids get relationships tangled. Used to come to their house drunk and say he was going to go tell somebody the truth, and that his stepdad would take him out to the porch and talk him down every time. I want to be careful here, Wade, because a boy's story is a boy's story. So I did what a person does. I went and looked. I pulled the news archive at the county library. 4 years, 7 months. I read every line of the coverage, and I found one thing that never sat right, and I've carried it for 6 years now. You passed the breathalyzer at the scene. .00. They charged you with vehicular manslaughter on speed alone and let the drinking go. And nobody in that town ever noticed, because by then, everybody had already decided what happened. But I noticed. A sober man on a straight stretch of Route 12 he'd driven 10,000 times doesn't come around the Halverson Bend at 70. A scared drunk 22-year-old does. I had to stop. I put the page down on my knee and looked out the fogged windshield at nothing. Wade. Delaney's voice was very small. What is it? Not yet. I never told her. I want you to understand why, because I think you of all people will. By the time I put it together, we were married. She had gotten to a place where she could sleep through the night. And I knew what she would do with it. She'd have gone to the prosecutor, and the paper, and your brother's front door, and she would have been right. And it would have taken your plea apart and put your brother in front of a judge with a perjury charge stacked underneath. And there was a little girl in Arizona who didn't do anything to anybody. And I'll be honest with you all the way down, because I'm out of time, and honesty is cheap now. I also didn't tell her because I loved my wife, and you were the only man alive who could have taken her from me. That's the ugliest sentence I've ever written. I'm leaving it in. But here's the thing, Wade. She never once said your name in 9 years. And she never once stopped flinching at the 3rd of March. And a man can live with being second as long as his wife is whole. She isn't whole. She never was. And now I'm going to be gone, and she is going to be alone with a 5-year-old, and a mortgage, and a hole in her that I couldn't fill because it wasn't shaped like me. So I'm giving it back. I'm not asking you to do anything. You may have a life. You may have a woman. You may want nothing to do with any of this, and God knows you'd have earned that. I'm only asking this. If you ever get the chance, tell her. Not for you. For her. She should know she never once in her life loved a guilty man. And Wade. The flowers. She thinks they're from a stranger. She talks about it every March, like it's the only kind thing left in the world. I figured out who they were from in about 9 seconds, and I never said a word about that either. Thank you for them. Every year. Thank you. Take care of them both if they'll let you. Tell June her daddy said the clavicle is the best bone, because it's the one that holds your arms on when you hug somebody. She'll know what that means. Ellis, I don't remember making a sound. I remember the paper going down on my knee and my hand coming up over my eyes, and then I remember it coming, the whole 9 years of it, and I could not stop it, and I did not try. 9 years, 4 in a cell and 5 out of 1, standing in leg irons at my daughter's burial with my face like a closed door, sitting in the visitation room while my wife screamed my name through glass. 9 marches on a hill in the dark. 9 Christmases at my mother's table where nobody said Delaney's name. And a school teacher I'd nodded at twice in a hardware store had known the whole time, and carried it, and given it back to me from the other side of his own grave. I broke in that car, all the way, head down, both hands over my face, making a sound I didn't recognize, in a Volvo wagon that smelled like crayons and cold coffee. And Delaney read the letter out of my lap while I did it. I felt her go still beside me. I heard the paper stop turning. Then she said, sober. I couldn't answer. You were sober. She was shaking. Wade, look at me. Was it Cade? I lifted my head. And that's when the last wall came down. Because there is no lying to a woman who has already read it in a dead man's handwriting. Yes, I said. She hit me. Open hand, flat on my chest. Once. Hard. Then she grabbed 2 fistfuls of my coat and pulled me forward and put her forehead against mine and started sobbing so hard I thought she'd come apart. You let me hate you, she said. You let me stand at that glass and hate you. I know. You let me bury her thinking you didn't care. I know, Delaney. Why? She shook me. Why? Because Marisol was 8 months pregnant. My voice was gone, sanded down to nothing. Because a second one with a death is 12 to 15. Because I looked at that road and I thought, I've got a clean record and a business and a wife who is stronger than anybody I've ever met. And Cade's got a baby coming, and nothing else. And I did the math wrong. I've known for 9 years I did the math wrong. I did it wrong the second I decided your strength meant you could be spent. She pulled back and looked at me with her face absolutely ruined. I would have waited, she said. I know you would have. I told you I would wait. I know. You hung up the phone. I know. And I said the thing I'd never let myself say. Not out loud. Not even alone in a truck at 2 in the morning. I hung up the phone because if you'd said it one more time, I'd have said yes. And then I'd have had you sitting in that room for 4 years and everybody in this town looking at you like you were married to a killer. And Delaney, I couldn't even give you the one thing that would have made it bearable. I couldn't tell you it wasn't true. I'd have taken 4 years of your life and given you nothing to hold. She sat back in the driver's seat, put both hands over her mouth, stared out the windshield at the gray hill, and then she said, very quietly, 9, Wade, not 4. It cost 9. There was nothing to say to that. She was right. Now let me tell you about Tessa Lindgren, because this story doesn't get to be clean. Tessa is a vet tech at the clinic on Ordway. 3 years. She's got a laugh you can hear across a parking lot, and she leaves sticky notes on my coffee maker, and she is, without exaggeration, one of the finest people I have ever known. She'd met Delaney once, 2 weeks before all this. By pure accident at the feed store. Tessa was buying kitten formula, and Delaney was buying a bag of birdseed, of all things. And Tessa came home and said, I met your ex-wife today. She's lovely. She helped me carry the cases out. Gracious. That's the word. She was gracious about it, and it was so much worse than if she'd been jealous. I drove to her place that night and told her all of it. The letter, the hill, Cade, everything I'd never told another living person. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting once. She cried at the part about the leg irons. And when I finished, she got up and refilled her water glass at the sink with her back to me, and she said, Can I ask you one question? Yeah. If she had walked back into your life 5 years ago, before any of this, before the letter, she turned around, would you have gone? I have replayed that moment 900 times. I didn't lie, but I took too long. Tessa nodded slowly, and her eyes filled up, and she said, Okay, Tessa. No, don't. She put her hand up. Don't fix it. You just gave me the truest answer you've ever given me, and it took you 4 seconds, and that's the answer. She set her key on the counter. My key. Off her ring. That I'd given her a year and a half ago. I want you to hear something, she said. And then I want you to go, because I'm about to fall apart, and I'd like to do it alone. I have loved you for 3 years. And the whole time there's been a room in you with the door shut. I told myself it was prison. I told myself it was time. Her voice cracked. It was a woman and a baby. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life knocking. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. I'd rather be alone, Tessa said, than be the room you're not in. I drove home with that key in my pocket, and I want you to know, I did not feel free. I felt like a man who had just been handed something valuable by someone who deserved better and had to carry it out the door. 2 days later, my mother found out. Corinne Kerrigan is 71 years old, 4'11", and has never once lost an argument in her life. She was standing in her kitchen with a dish towel in her hands when I told her Delaney knew. She went white. You told her. Ellis told her. From the grave. I just confirmed it. Wade Allen. She threw the towel on the counter. 9 years. 9 years I've kept my mouth shut. I sat in this kitchen while the Reynolds' cousin looked at me in the Piggly Wiggly, like I raised a murderer. I let this whole town, and then she stopped. And her face did something I'd never seen it do. She sat down at her own kitchen table. I hated her, my mother said. Do you understand that? I hated that girl for 9 years. She left you in a cell. She married a man inside of 5 years. She took your name off her mailbox. I have said things about Delaney Prosper in this room that I will answer to God for. She looked up at me, and her eyes were streaming. And she didn't know. She didn't know, Wade. She was grieving a man who was never there, and I let her carry it. Mom and Cade. She said his name like it burned. Your brother is in Arizona, putting up drywall, and posting pictures of that girl's birthday parties. And he has not called this house since Easter, and my son went to prison for him, and stood in chains at my granddaughter's funeral. Mom. Stop. I crouched down in front of her chair, the way I used to when I was a kid, and she'd had a bad day at the plant. I need you to hear one thing, and then I need you to let it go. She waited. She didn't leave me, I said. I left first. I just did it without going anywhere. My mother put her hand on my face and cried like a child. 2 weeks later, she baked a coffee cake, drove to Delaney's house on Ordway with it in her lap, sat in the driveway for 11 minutes, and then went and knocked on the door and apologized to a woman she'd hated for 9 years. Delaney told me later they sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. She said my mother held her hand the whole time, and neither of them ate a bite of that cake. Spring came in slow that year. And here's the part people always get wrong about stories like this. We didn't fall into each other. There was no running through the rain. What actually happened was that Delaney Prosper sat me down at the diner on 4th with a cup of coffee going cold between her hands, and laid out terms like a woman signing a lease. I have a 5-year-old, she said. Her father died 14 months ago at the kitchen sink while she was in the next room watching cartoons. She still asks me when he's coming back, about once a month, and every time she asks, I lose a year off my life. I know. So here's how it goes. I will not do this halfway, and I will not do this fast. You don't get to be a man who's around. You're either in this all the way, or you are a nice man who fixed my car, and both of those are fine, but you have to pick, and once you pick, June gets attached, and if you leave after that, I will never forgive you as long as I live. Okay, and Wade. She leaned forward. The other thing. The big thing. Say it. When you go quiet, she said. You go somewhere I can't reach. You did it after Ren. Before any of the rest of it. You did it in that visitation room. You've done it your entire life, and you call it protecting people. Her jaw set. I'm not doing 9 more years of a closed door. I'd rather be alone. Say the thing on the day you feel it. Out loud. Badly. I don't care how it comes out. But it has to come out. I sat there with my hands around that mug, and I understood that she had just described the exact shape of every disaster in my life. I'm going to be terrible at it, I said. I know. Like, genuinely bad. I know, Wade. And for the first time in 9 years, Delaney Prosper smiled at me. Small, barely there, but it was hers, and I knew it, and it hit me like a truck. Do it anyway. So that's what we did. I did not move in. I did not sweep anybody off their feet. I rehung her back fence in April. I sat in the back row at kindergarten parent night and let her introduce me as my friend Wade, and did not flinch at the word friend. I put 4 new tires on that Volvo and refused to tell her what they cost, and she was furious about it for a week. And June Ashbury, 5 years old, who narrates her own life in the third person and has no fear of anything, walked up to me the second time she ever saw me. I was under a mower deck at the shop, and said, June wants to know what your favorite bone is. I slid out from under the mower. Clavicle, I said. She frowned at me hard. Why? Because I broke mine when I was 9, and it healed crooked, and you can still feel the bump. I put her hand on it so she could. Her eyes went enormous. And because it's the one that holds your arms on. I did not know I was quoting her father. I found that out 4 months later. June Ashbury looked up at me with her hand on my collarbone and decided, right there in a shop that smelled like gear oil, that I was the greatest man who had ever lived. I looked up and Delaney was standing in the doorway with the light behind her. She went out and stood in the parking lot for a while. Then in May, everything nearly came apart. It was a Tuesday in the middle of May, and the cottonwood was coming down thick over Coldwater Bend, like snow that forgot the season. I was closing the shop when my phone went off. Delaney's name. She never called. She texted. 9 years of silence and then 4 months of texting, and the one time her name came up on that screen with the phone actually ringing, I knew before I answered. June can't breathe. That's all she said. Not hello. Not Wade. Just those 3 words. And behind them a sound I will hear until the day I die. A little girl pulling air through a straw that isn't there. Where are you? Ridgeton. The ER. They took her back. They took her right back, Wade. They didn't even make us sit. 20 minutes. I made it in 14, and then I sat in that parking lot for 6 hours. I want you to understand what that means. I sat in my truck under a sodium light, with the engine off and the windows down and cottonwood drifting across the hood, close enough to see the sliding doors, and I did not go inside. 6 hours. Because here is what I have never told anybody, including Delaney, including my mother, including you until right now. The last time I walked through a set of doors like that, I was wearing a belly chain. Not the burial. Before that. And 4 months into my sentence, they drove me to the county hospital because I'd caught something in the kitchen that turned into a fever they couldn't get down, and they walked me through the emergency entrance in leg irons at 2 in the morning, and a woman in the waiting room grabbed her son and pulled him against her chest and turned him away from me. 9 years later, I still could not make my legs carry me through automatic doors into a fluorescent room with sick children in it. Some things go in and they don't come out. That's just true. And on top of that, sitting there in the dark, the other voice started up. The old one. The one that runs my whole life. You have no right to be in there. You are not her father. That man is in the ground. And he wrote you a letter, and it was kind, and it was not an invitation. You are the man from the ditch on Route 12. Stay in the parking lot where you belong. So I stayed. At 2:10 in the morning, the sliding doors opened, and Delaney came out. She had her arms wrapped around herself, and she was walking like a woman who had aged 9 years and 9 hours, and she went straight past 3 rows of cars to my truck, like she'd known exactly where it was the entire time. She opened the passenger door and got in and shut it. Neither of us said anything for a while. She's okay, Delaney said finally. Steroids, nebulizer. They're keeping her till morning to watch her sats. She wiped her face with the flat of her hand. It was asthma. She's had it since she was 2. It's never been like this. Okay? They asked me if there was anybody they should call. I looked at the steering wheel. How long have you been out here, Wade? A while. How long? Since about 8. She turned in the seat and looked at me. And in the orange light coming through that windshield, I watched Delaney Prosper's face go through grief and fury, and something enormous and tired, and land on the thing she'd been trying to teach me since March. This, she said. This right here. This is the whole thing. Delaney. No. You listen. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You went quiet. You went outside. And you called it respect. And you called it knowing your place. And you have called it 100 different things in your life. But it is always the same thing. It's you deciding. All by yourself. In the dark. What people can handle. You did it on that road with your brother. You did it with a phone in your hand in Jefferson City. And you did it tonight in a parking lot, while I sat in a room by myself, holding my daughter's hand, and every single time a door opened, I looked up. I couldn't breathe right. I don't need a man who protects me from himself, she said. I need one who comes inside. And then she said it plain, the way she says everything. Come inside, Wade. That's all. That's all I ever wanted. Just come inside. I sat there with my hands on my knees. I don't know if I can walk through those doors. I know you don't. She reached over and took my hand off my knee and held it in both of hers, and it was the first time she'd held my hand since I was 31 years old. So we'll do it slow. And if you stop halfway, I'll stop halfway with you. And if you have to turn around, I'll turn around with you. and we'll try again in an hour." I looked at her. "That's the part you never understood," Delaney said. "You always thought love meant carrying it alone, so nobody else had to. It doesn't. It means somebody stands in the doorway with you, until you can go through." We walked across that parking lot together. I made it to the curb and stopped. She waited. I made it to the mat and the doors slid open and the light and the smell hit me. Disinfectant and coffee and that hospital smell that goes straight to the animal part of your brain. And I froze so hard she felt it through my arm. She didn't pull. She didn't talk. She just stood there in the doorway with the doors going open, closed against her shoulder, holding on to me. And then I went in. At 4 a.m, June Ashbury woke up in a bed too big for her, with a nebulizer mask hanging off the rail, and I was sitting in the chair beside her holding her hand because her mother had gone to find coffee. Her eyes came open slow. She looked at me, and in a voice like sandpaper, 5 years old, at 4 a.m, she said, "What's a rib for?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. Sitting in a plastic chair in a children's ward, with my throat closed up and my eyes running, I laughed out loud. "Ribs are a cage," I told her. "They're a little cage around your heart and your lungs, so nothing can get at them." June thought about that. "June's ribs did a bad job tonight," she said. "No, ma'am." I leaned in. "Your ribs held. That's why you're here." She squeezed my finger, went back to sleep. And I looked up and Delaney was standing in the doorway with 2 coffees, and she had heard all of it, and she was crying, and neither of us said one single word. I proposed to her in July. Not a grand gesture. She'd have hated that, and honestly I think she'd have said no on principle. But before that, before the ring, before any of it, I drove 19 hours to Mesa, Arizona. I didn't tell Cade I was coming. I pulled up in front of a stucco house with a basketball hoop over the garage and a girl's bike on its side in the yard. And I sat in the truck and watched a 9-year-old girl named Sella, my niece, who I have seen 4 times in her entire life, ride that bike in circles in the driveway. Cade came out with a garbage bag in his hand and saw my truck and dropped it. We sat on the tailgate for 2 hours. He's been sober 8 years. He goes to meetings on Mondays and Thursdays. He said he sends money to Tobias Renard's mother every month, through a lawyer, and has since the year he got clean, and she has never once cashed a check, and he keeps sending them anyway. And he said, "I've written you about 40 letters. I never got a letter. I never mailed one." He was crying. 41 years old, big hands, crying on my tailgate. Because every time I got to the end, I understood there was no sentence a person could put down that would touch it. "What do you write, Wade?" "Thanks for my life?" I let him sit in it. And then I told him why I'd driven 19 hours. "I'm not here for an apology," I said. "I'm not going to the prosecutor. I'm not blowing it up. It's done, and it stays done, and Sella is going to graduate high school with her father in the 3rd row." He couldn't look at me. "I came to tell you I'm done carrying it," I said. "Delaney knows. My mother knows. That's the whole list, and that's where it stops. And I'm going to marry her, and I'm going to raise that little girl, and I'm going to be happy, Cade. I've decided, and I wanted to say it to your face, so you'd know it's not a thing you have to fix anymore. Because you can't, and you trying is going to eat you alive." My brother put his head in his hands. Then he said the words. 9 years late, on a tailgate in Arizona, in 104 degrees. "I'm sorry, Wade, for all of it, every day of it. And here's the thing nobody tells you. I didn't need them anymore. I'd needed them for 9 years, and I'd stopped needing them somewhere between a hill in March and a hospital doorway in May. And when they finally came, they were just words from a man I love, who did a terrible thing when he was 22, and has paid for it every day since." I hugged my brother in his driveway. Sella rode past us on the bike and yelled, "Who's that?" And Cade said, "That's your Uncle Wade, baby. That's the best man I know." I asked Delaney on the tailgate of my truck at the pull-off on Route 12. Same spot, same shoulder. 4 months later, in July, with the corn up on both sides and the heat coming off the asphalt in waves. I didn't make a speech. I said, "I've got something to say, and I'm going to say it badly, which is the deal we made." She laughed. "Go. I'm not asking you to go back," I said. "Those 2 kids are gone. That girl at the glass, and that man on the other side of it, they don't exist anymore, and I don't want them back, because he did the worst thing a man can do to somebody he loves, which is decide for her. She'd gone very still. I'm asking you forward, and I'm asking for all three of you, and June, and Ren. She comes with us. She's not a thing we survived. She's my daughter, and she gets talked about at the dinner table. Delaney's hand came up over her mouth, and I got out a ring that was not her old ring, because I sold that in the first year of my sentence to pay a lawyer, and honestly I'm glad, because it belonged to two people who didn't make it. She said yes before I finished asking. We got married in September, in my mother's backyard with 31 people, most of a folding chair collection borrowed from the Methodist Church, and June Ashbury carrying the rings in a Folgers can she decorated herself with glitter glue and approximately 900 dinosaur stickers. My mother cried through the whole thing, and when it was over, she went straight past me, past her own son, and grabbed Delaney first, and held on to her for a long, long time. Tessa Lindgren sent a card. I want you to know that, because she deserves to be in this story with her head up. It said, I meant what I said. I'm glad the room finally has somebody in it. Be good to her. She got engaged the following spring to a large animal vet out of Ridgeton who is, by all accounts, a genuinely funny man. I hope she has 40 years of it. Birdie was born the next March. I'll tell you the truth about that pregnancy. We were not joyful. We were terrified. Every appointment, both of us in that room with our hands locked together, both of us braced. At 23 weeks we sat in the parking lot afterward, and neither one of us could start the car for 20 minutes. But we said it out loud. Every time. Every single time, we said the scared thing out loud, on the day we felt it. Badly. And it did not fix anything, but it meant nobody was alone in the dark. A girl. Healthy. 7 pounds 1 ounce. We let June name her. She stood up on the hospital bed with her hands on her hips, considered her sister for a full minute, and announced, her name is Birdie. Because it's like Ren, but it's her own. 5 years old. Solved in 10 seconds what the rest of us couldn't have done in a year. Which brings me to last March. The 4 of us went up that hill together. Cold, clear morning. Frost on everything. The sun just coming over the maintenance shed. Delaney had Birdie on her hip. And June, 7 now, missing 2 teeth, opinions on everything, carried the white ranunculus herself, because she'd asked to. Because she said, and I quote, June thinks Ren should get them from a kid for once. She put them at the base of that little gray stone and told her sister about her spelling test. I stood there with my wife's hand in mine, and I thought about a school teacher in the ground on the other side of that same cemetery who gave me all of this from inside a sealed envelope, and I went over there afterward, alone, like I do now, and I told him. Every year I tell him. On the drive home, I pulled off at the shoulder on Route 12, without saying anything, the way I always do now. There's a steel post welded into the ground there. 4 inches of square tube, painted black. No plaque, no name. Nothing anybody driving by would ever notice. I put it in the second summer. It's for 2 things at once, and I've never explained it to another living soul. And I'm only telling you, it's for a 24-year-old man named Tobias Ranard, who never got to be 25, and it's for the night I stopped. Delaney looked out at it. Then she put her hand on my knee. You stopped, she said. I was always going to stop, I said. It just took me 9 years to get there. So let me leave you with the thing I actually carry. I told myself for 9 years that I was being noble. That silence was love. That the strongest thing a man can do is pick up the whole weight by himself and never let anybody see him bend under it. And it cost me 4 years in a cell, 5 years of a stranger's life, a marriage, and the right to stand at my own daughter's grave without chains on. Not 1 minute of that was necessary because I was in prison. All of it happened because I decided, alone, in the dark, without asking her, what the woman who loved me was strong enough to know. So here's my question for you, and I want you to actually sit with it before you scroll. Who in your life have you gone quiet on and called it protecting them? Whose truth are you holding right now because you've decided they can't carry it? Your mother, your husband, your kid, that friend you stopped calling because the news was too heavy and it felt kinder to just disappear. Ask yourself honestly, is it really mercy? Or is it that saying it out loud would mean somebody finally sees you bending, and you'd rather be a closed door than a man on his knees in a parking lot? Because Delaney was right. Love isn't carrying it alone, so nobody else has to. It's letting somebody stand in the doorway with you until you can walk through. Tell me down in the comments, did Wade do the right thing on that road with his brother? Or did he steal 9 years from the only person who ever truly loved him? I read every single one, and I promise you, this one's going to split the room. And if this story moved you, if you've got a person you need to call, do me one favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. There's a story coming next week that I've been holding on to for a long time, and you won't want to be the one who missed it. Thank you for sitting with Wade and Delaney all the way to the end. I'll see you on the next one.